a post-Christianity or post-truth culture is. In his book, Disappearing Church, Mark Sayers highlights some set of beliefs of a post-Christian society, or post-truth as well. So we go on the bullet points here. Number one is the highest good is individual freedom, happiness, self-definition, and self-expression. No more people want outside sources or outside voices to define what reality is, define who they are. They want to discover that themselves. Individual freedom becomes the highest good. If you achieve that, if you have individual happiness, if you find a way where you're happy in the way you self-express to others, that's all good. Morality is reduced to that. So with that, it means that traditions, religions, received wisdom, regulations, social ties that restrict individual freedom, happiness, self-definition, and self-expression must be reshaped, deconstructed, and destroyed. So anything that stands in the way of that individual pursuit for self-definition and self-expression, whether you're looking at big organizational structures, you're looking at religious systems, cultural traditions, or just the received wisdom of an individual, if it stands on the way of that, of your pursuit for self-definition, then that needs to be reshaped, or it needs to actually be discarded. Another conclusion from Mark Sayers is that the world will inevitably improve as the scope of individual freedom grows. Technology, in particular, the internet, will model this progression toward utopia. And so individual freedom means access to information on my own. So now when it talks to social ethics, the primary social ethic is a tolerance for everyone's self-defined quest for individual freedom and self-expression. Any deviation from this ethic of tolerance is dangerous and must not be tolerated. Social justice is less about economic or class inequality and more about issues relating to individual identity, self-expression, and personal autonomy. So here is a very, very critical point in an analysis of post-Christian culture. It's that the idea of the moral compass, ethics, all of that gets reduced to just tolerating everyone's self-defined quest. Ethics becomes anything that defends someone's right to express however they want. If you advocate for an ethic system, a system of beliefs that is restrictive to self-expression, then that's evil. Now, this is an important one in a world where we hear terms like wokeness or social justice, because social justice is important. In fact, I think Christianity, evangelical Christianity, has neglected social justice to our own detriment. But even how social justice is being portrayed is that it's really less about the inequalities that they're calling out, that at the bottom of that outward expression, it's really about personal autonomy. It's about the fact that I'm not going to let society, I'm not going to let a religion, I'm not going to let a leader, a spiritual leader, tell me what to do. There is a suspicion of institutions in a post-Christian and post-truth culture. Again, anything that tries to define someone's identity from the outside should be looked at by suspicion in a post-truth culture. Forms of external authority are rejected and personal authenticity is lauded. Now, I want to put a pause on this for a moment, because this is not to say that because of this, that we should basically completely move on from from how church has operated. Or a pastor, the biblical mandate is to teach, is to instruct others in the ways of the Lord. And we teach the Bible, and the Bible is clear about issues. Some of those issues do not fly very well in a post-Christian and post-truth culture. It's not all bad. I think there's value in the fact that, we want more accountability from institutions. That's good. Transparency. Even point number 5, humans are inherently good. Now, I don't want, again, this is not a systematic theology course. We want to look at, how does that play, or how does that relate to the idea of original sin. But the fact that in a post-Christian, post-truth culture, we look at humanity and we try to see the good, I think that's good. We have become very fatalistic in the way we analyze human beings. So that's hopeful in a way. But this is an opportunity rather than to move on from what has made the church, because we can't. This is an opportunity to reevaluate how we do it. And the fact that number 7 talks about personal authenticity being lauded is something that should be good news to those in pastoral ministry. Because it's not so much that we are not supposed to say certain things, but it's the fact that in the current culture, it's less about your titles, your qualifications. It's less about any sense of external authority that you can carry on yourself. And it's more about just being authentic with people. And so you're authentic before the community you're reaching, then they will listen. And they will listen with open hearts and minds to what we're saying, and they will follow what we're saying. It's just rather than brokering the following through the authority that we carry, in a post-Christian, post-truth culture, we broker the following through being authentic in before someone. So that's the where and the when. Now the why. So the why of pastoral ministry. Your call, your gifts, your ministry experience, your worldview. Then your theology as well. What is the greatest threat to the local church? And is the threat external or is it internal? Well, I think it's both. But in the way we understand ourselves, one of the worst things that we can do, and that's what's important, the why of pastoral ministry. Pastoral ministry, we enter pastoral ministry, and yes, it involves leading others, teaching others, but that doesn't mean that the work of God to teach us, to lead us, to help us grow stops. And so one of the things that we need to be aware of is blind spots and ruts. A blind spot, ignoring a blind spot means that we will be blocking God's work in us, because again, when we step into pastoral ministry, it doesn't mean that the work of God stops in us. So there is blind ignorance. What is that? Blind ignorance is being ignorant of things that everyone else sees. So, if your spouse, if your children, if a trusted friend, if a congregant, if more than one are saying, hey, I notice that you get easily angry. I notice that there is this reaction, and we ignore that, that's blind ignorance. because it's not just one or two that are seen, especially if it becomes a lot of people in different contexts. At one point, we need to then look at ourselves. So, superficial intimacy. So that's another obstacle, which means that we become superficial about the relationships that are personal and important for us. We can allow our pastoral position to affect that, and it doesn't have to. You connect with friends and family in an intimate and relational way. That's still important. Kids and spouses, are very, very important. That those relationships need to continue to be nurtured. And we cannot get to the realm of superficial intimacy in which, yes, we might acknowledge our spouse and our children, but we are not pursuing a deeper personal connection with them because we are preoccupied with the ministry. We cannot grasp truth in isolation, and that comes from the American Psychology Association. There is arrogant entitlement. So ministry can make us entitled if we're not careful. Rather than seeing ourselves as humble servants, we can become entitled leaders that demand, that we see ministry as, this is a way for others to serve me, when at the heart of pastoral ministry, doesn't matter the size of the people that you're caring for, you and I are still called to serve. That's what pastoral ministry is all about. That's what ministry, the word ministry itself means. And so being careful that arrogance doesn't take root in our hearts. Stubborn resistance. It's when we actively resist the work of transformation. It's getting to a point where even if we identify blind spots, we still resist working on those blind spots. Any kind of addiction, any kind of thing that we cannot let go, and we just resist, it's wrong. So to conclude this portion, in reality, the greatest internal threat to the local church is you and I. We cannot talk about pastoral theology without acknowledging that the reason why we go through a pastoral theology course is that you and I can become the greatest threat to the local church or to the ministry or the group that we're reaching. Because we're privy, we are vulnerable to some of the things that we just talked about, to the arrogance, to the entitlement, to the stubborn resistance. And so we need to work on that. Because God intends the church to have pastors. So the reaction to this is, what do we do with all the leadership scandals, the abuse of power, unfortunate events that have come up to the surface in the last few years, in the last few decades? Does that mean that we should look at a possibility of just undoing all of that? No, we can't, because theologically speaking, the Bible talks about the fact that God intends the church to have pastors. It is God. Pastoral ministry is God's invention. So Ephesians 4:11 says he has given to some, and that's the fivefold office, of which pastoring is one of them. Acts 14:23, Titus 1:5, 1 Timothy 3:1 even says that if you want to be an elder, you desire a good thing. So 1 Peter 5:1-2, shepherds shepherd the flock of God. It's the instruction. So foundationally speaking, it is God's intention for the church to have pastors. The church is a better place with pastors in it. But the church is a better place with pastors that understand the limitations of their own pastoral office. Because if we don't, then we can become a threat. There are 3 New Testament words for pastor. They come in these squares here. So you have the word that is translated as shepherd. You have the word that our Bibles translate as elder. That will be presbyteros. And then you have the word that is often translated as overseer, which is episkopos. That Greek word episkopos is where we will get eventually our word episcopalian or bishop. And so this, if we want an understanding of even the meaning of the word pastor, biblically speaking, we see these layers. Elder, overseer, shepherd. And so those 3 are the ones. Now, within these 3 terms, there are layers to what a pastor does, to the functions of a pastor. And they're all combined and they're all important. Shepherd, it's the one that lies closest to the heart because it's your identity. The pastor, when he or she begins to enter into that office of a pastor, you become a shepherd. You become someone who's watching over others. It becomes part of our identity. We care for them. The elder relates more to reputation. It's not so much age. I know the word presbyteros means elders as in aged, but this is coming from the Jewish synagogue model where the elder of the synagogue weren't so much older in age, but they were more respected because they had a definite track record of the knowledge of Torah and the way they carry themselves in the community. So the elder aspect of our role as a pastor, it's building good reputation with everyone. And part of that is teaching, is the way we address others publicly. The third one, and certainly I'm not trying to create a hierarchy of terms here where one is over the other. And I think we look at all of them as equal parts of a whole concept, which is overseer, which means this is more about role and position. The pastor must administer the dealings of the church, the resources of the church, the staff of the church. And this is one where each of these 3 seep into each other. For example, as an overseer, administrating who you have around you, who you're relying in leading, your relationship with them should also come with a sense of care for them. So it's not, the overseer is not there being a dictator, barking all orders and and not caring humanly for those that are helping him or her carrying the vision of God. And so we bring shepherding components even in the way we oversee things. Financial decisions, cutting budgets is, even though there is a financial reality, should also come from a fact of, if we have to cut something, are we doing it in the best interest of the whole church as a whole? Teaching must also inform the way we administer, the way we care. It's not just care as in we give someone a pat in the back. Is part of caring is we instruct them, and that means we instruct them about the things that they should do, and we bring correction because they're doing things that the Bible says they shouldn't do. So we have that. Certainly, and as a comparative study, we must look at how in current literature, Christian literature, a church leader is analyzed. So we said at the beginning of the course that shepherd is a controlling metaphor in pastoral ministry. Biblically speaking, it's the one analogy that surfaces in basically every aspect of leadership. How are we talking about church leadership in our current literature, in particular in pastoral ministry? Well, we have delved into a language of the corporate world. We've borrowed lots of things from that. CEO, church leaders, pastors in current literature are talked about as CEOs, as they were CEOs of a multinational company. Now, obviously, part of leading a church board or a pastoral council meeting means that, humanly speaking, you're functioning as the CEO of that board, the chief executive officer. The board has a voice and vote, but the pastor is the head of that board and has an executive decision making, and is chief among the equals of the board. But we have reduced pastoral ministry to CEO, and so literature is geared towards maximizing your CEO persona. Change agent, the charismatic leader, a coach, a chaplain, a spiritual architect. So these are some of the metaphors for church leaders in current literature. Doesn't mean that they're bad in and of themselves, especially because some of them actually involve things that a pastor should do. But it's the place of these metaphors. It should never be done to the detriment and the neglecting of the shepherding metaphor, which is at the heart of a pastor's identity. This is what Gordon MacDonald says. Someone needs to say, and I'm not sure if I have the courage, that everything in Christendom isn't about vision, growth, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Someone, whoever he or she might be, ought to suggest that visionaries often overlook what we might call pastoring. That's an old word with deep implications, and it means tending sheep. Very compelling argument. The shepherding image is the controlling metaphor, and it doesn't just begin with New Testament. It's present in the Old Testament. Now, in the Old Testament, they didn't have pastors. Israel's leadership was on a kind of like a tripod model, where you have prophets, you have the priests, and you have the kings. At one point, and naturally with Moses, he was a prophet in that he mediated God's word and taught it to them. the priest aspect of serving in the temple with the sacrifices was given to his brother Aaron and his descendants and the Levites. Later on, it is the 12 tribes asked for a king. And again, we don't want to get bogged down in the details of what should be an Old Testament survey topic, but we cannot just see, they asked for a king and that was bad, because in the law they had already talked about the qualifications for a king in Deuteronomy. What was rejecting upon God is the fact that the motivation behind wanting a king was that they wanted to be like the other nations. In other words, God, we don't want you as our king, and there is a hope that you will appoint a human king at one point. We just want to be like the other nations now. But, and so that was the idea. But the interesting thing is that there is the shepherding image present in the functions of these three types of offices. And here are some scriptures for you. 2 Samuel 5:2, Psalm 78, 70, 72, Nahum 3:18, Ezekiel 31, 116 is a very compelling one, in that the Israel's leaders are talked about collectively as shepherds. So the indictment is that the shepherds, whether were prophets, priests, or kings, they have failed to shepherd the flock. They have failed to heal the sick, to bind the wounded. And it's a very compelling and direct indictment from God upon the leaders of Israel. Why it seems that shepherding is a primary metaphor for pastors? It has rich historical roots. Even the word pastor has a Latin root, and that Latin root is for shepherding. It's borrowed from actual shepherds of sheep and animals and translated into the idea of caring for the people of God. So there is a biblical present, but there's also a church history present for that. And so it has rich historical roots, because in a lot of ways the church has functioned around a pastor elder model. Now, some traditions call them bishops, archbishops, presbyters, but at the end of the day, no matter the tradition, the church has functioned with a figurehead in the local church context. In the evangelical, non-liturgical tradition that Pentecostals have borrowed from was concentrated on the image of the pastor or the shepherd or the minister, which in a lot of ways, minister also means servant. So it's all connected. But even in traditions where they don't call them pastors, you still see the shepherding imagery for it. For example, the parson is another one. The parson actually means a person. And so the parson is that person, is that soul that leads the community, that leads them before God in prayer. How about curate? This one has a Latin root as well. The curate comes from the Latin root cura, which, yes, the verb cure in English has borrowed from that. And the curate, again, it entails to the fact that the pastor provides cure for souls in the parish or in the church or in the group, that what they do brings healing, spiritual and emotional healing. Once again, all these metaphors, all these figures of speech are talking about the fact that it's about the influence that we exert on others, the benefits, the healing that we can facilitate on others that makes the pastor the pastor. So this idea of curing and serving is foundational to a good pastoral theology. Preacher is another one. This is more evangelical. And preach stresses that the role of a public declared word is central to the pastoral function. Priest. Now this is more on Anglicanism and Catholicism and the Orthodox Church. But the priest, again, borrowing from the Old Testament imagery where the high priest will go into the Holy of Holies on behalf of the people and present sacrifices. Obviously, Jesus is our sacrifice now. They don't present sacrifices, but in the context where there is priest, their role as priest is to present the sacraments to the people, and that's at the center of the ministry. The Catholic liturgy, it's when the priest blesses the elements and gives the elements for communion, that's the central part of the gathering. Minister, which again comes from the Greek word diakonos or doulos. Both of them mean servant or bond servant or willing servant. Clergy, the root word for clergy is clerk. And clergy is a more sophisticated term in that you're considered clergy when you have completed an educational track that prepares you for ministry. And so you become a member of the clergy. And from the 15th century on, there is the term reverend, which is a title of respect, someone that deserves respect. From John 10:1-18, we get a very good outline of the shepherding analogy. These are the words of Jesus, and in a lot of ways, John 1:18 is the answer to Ezekiel 34, where there was an indictment upon the shepherds of Israel. Jesus, who's God in the flesh, comes and publicly declares why he is the good shepherd. The ones before that failed, and he comes to even redeem the idea of shepherding. And that's John 1:18. In that text, we know that the shepherd has a knowledge towards the flock. Not an outside knowledge, but a very intimate knowledge. He even holds them. So there is a closeness there. The way the shepherd calls each one by its own name. So in other words, it's not just I know you from afar, I know who you are. The shepherd is not like the thief that enters the pen properly by the gate. And this one could have lots of implications due to abuse of leadership, in that a shepherd is invited in, a shepherd is accepted in. The authority of the shepherd is a privilege that is given upon it, and we cannot act like thieves to exert ourselves on others. That the flock listens to the shepherd's voice, that they can distinguish it from all other voices. The shepherd feeds them, leading them out back in. So that's guidance, direction. The shepherd is out ahead of them. So it's not just guiding them, but actually looking out for them by going ahead of them. creates a trust. So there's a safe space dynamic where the sheep actually feel protected. And as good pastoral theology will say, that we have, the onus is on us, the pastors, to create that for our congregations. And that the good shepherd is contrasted with a hireling or a temporary worker whose motivation is very superficial. They have little at stake, and because they have little at stake, once it gets dangerous, they can easily run away. A shepherd will stay with the flock even when there is danger. They will stay till the very end with them. That concludes our first portion for this course, which has been pre-recorded ahead of our first time together. You're required to read your textbooks and to follow the schedule. But foundationally speaking, this is what we need to know about pastoral theology. We're now going to flesh out basically what kind of theological principles are there that define our role as shepherds, elders, and overseers, and how it gets applied into difficult circumstances. But this becomes the foundational piece, in that the office of pastoring, the functions of pastoring are defined by the act of shepherding, of providing care, selfless care for others. So I look forward to seeing you soon, and if you have any questions, reach out to me. Thank you.